All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today, we are tackling something that is absolutely foundational to modern business, ESG. But actually, scratch that. We're tossing out the old definitions today. We're going to completely shift how you view environment, society, and governance. We need to move away from these isolated little categories and start looking at the living, breathing system they actually create. Think about how ESG is usually talked about, right? For a lot of us, we've basically been taught to treat it like a simple three-part checklist. You got an environmental box to check, a social box, a governance box, boom, done. But I want to pose a question to you. What if that checklist mentality means you're totally missing the big picture? Like, what if the real story, and honestly, the real compounding risk, isn't found neatly inside those boxes, but in the messy spaces between them?
Okay, let's just dive right into this. The fundamental flaw in how most people approach these pillars today is what we call the silo problem. When organizations treat ES&G as these completely separate islands, they manage them with totally different teams, they measure them with different metrics, and they report on them in completely different sections of an annual report. There's literally no shared thread connecting them. Since you already know the basics here, let's quickly just reframe how we really should be looking at these footprints. So, the environmental pillar covers things like carbon emissions, resource use, and climate exposure. Right. But rather than just viewing this as an ecological footprint, I want you to think of it as the physical reality that triggers everything else. It's the raw, environmental baseline that sets this entire system in motion.
Then, of course, we have the social pillar. We all know this covers labor standards, human rights, and community engagement. But when we look at it through a systems thinking lens, this is really the human reaction. It's how your employees, the local communities, the supply chain workers, how they absorb, respond to, and eventually push back against what an organization does. And governance, board oversight, ethics, transparency. You know the drill here for sure. But in an interconnected framework, this isn't just a boring compliance checklist. This is the structural foundation. It's the internal compass that dictates exactly how an organization manages the first two pillars. So this is where the major paradigm shift happens. We have to abandon those three separate checklists, period. We need to move to a framework view where E, S, and G are one single interconnected system. They just aren't separate. Each pillar fundamentally shapes and is actively shaped by the other two. A change anywhere in this framework creates immediate, unavoidable ripple effects everywhere else.
Now, what's genuinely fascinating here is this ESG linkage triangle. Instead of three isolated islands, we're looking at six directional pathways constantly flowing between environment, society, and governance. And these pathways, they aren't just academic theory. They are the literal key to understanding organizational risk in the modern world. Let's look at a quick flyover of how these interact. Environmental realities, like, say, climate risk, directly shape what happens to local communities. Then, the trust those communities have in an organization, that social trust, is what grants the actual legitimacy needed for strong governance. Rounding it out, the governance structures and regulations you put in place, those are exactly what drive and enforce environmental practices. It's just a continuous, unbreakable loop. And in the real world, this stuff doesn't happen in slow motion. It is a domino effect. One piece falls, it smacks into the next, and suddenly, systemic risks are compounding at an incredibly fast pace. A single issue in one pillar can rapidly morph into a massive crisis in another, often before leadership even realizes what hit them. Let's map out exactly how this chain reaction works. We'll kick things off with the first crucial linkage, the pathway from environment straight into society. Because listen, environmental conditions aren't just abstract statistics. They dictate real human outcomes. Resource scarcity, pollution, climate volatility, they don't hit everyone equally. They fall the hardest on the communities that have the absolute least capacity to absorb them. Just to make this super concrete, look at how these elements compound. Severe water stress directly displaces farming communities, which totally destroys local economies. Or consider this. Industrial air pollution isn't just some vague emissions problem. It drives up global public health costs by an estimated $8 billion every single day. When extreme climate events hit, they immediately disrupt local employment and force migration. So what started as a purely environmental metric has, in a flash, become a massive social crisis. Let's keep moving and see how this builds, bringing us to our second linkage, society to governance. Because just as the environment shapes society, social expectations absolutely set the boundaries of legitimate governance. Public sentiment isn't just PR noise anymore. It is a very real structural force.
Think about the real-world mechanics of this. When employees organize and advocate, they actively shape board-level policies from the ground up. When consumers exert intense pressure, well, that forces organizations to adopt way stricter disclosure rules. Ultimately, community trust isn't just a nice-to-have bonus, it acts as an organization's literal license to operate. Without that social backing, governance structures just lose their authority fast.
And that brings us to the final side of the triangle, the third linkage, governance to environment. So we've seen how the environment hits people and how people demand better governance. Now, governance structures have to step up. They determine whether those glossy environmental commitments actually translate into real-world action.
So how exactly does governance make the environment better? Through very specific, enforceable mechanisms. We're talking board-level oversight that rigorously tracks emissions. We're talking tying an executive's actual, literal paycheck directly to whether or not the company hits its sustainability targets. It relies on strict regulatory compliance, because without those hard governance structures, environmental targets are nothing more than empty promises on a piece of paper.
Okay, so we've connected the dots, we've seen the whole triangle, but so what? Why does shifting from a siloed checklist to this systems thinking actually matter to you? Well, whether you're trying to run a resilient organization, allocate capital, or write the rules of the game, this interconnected view is literally the only way to operate effectively today. Let's break this down based on where you sit. If you're in business, the systems thinking reveals hidden risks. It shows you how a quiet little environmental issue can suddenly explode into a full-blown governance crisis before it even touches your balance sheet. If you're an investor, it supports much better risk pricing. Since linked factors compound, analyzing them in isolation will always understate your real exposure. And if you're writing policy, it justifies integrated regulation, proving that treating E, S, and G together is the only way to close the loopholes left by those old siloed frameworks. So the crucial point I want you to take away is this. ESG is a dynamic, interconnected system. It's not a set of isolated checklists. There are 6 directional pathways constantly connecting these pillars. Evaluating any single pillar in a vacuum is a massive, dangerous blind spot, because ignoring one hides real, compounding risk in the others. It's only by adopting this interconnected, linkage-based thinking that you can get an accurate picture of an organization's true health. I want to leave you with something to chew on as you look at your own workflows this week. Look really closely at how your organization operates right now. Are you trapped in that old silo mentality? Are you measuring the environment in one room and governance in a completely different building? Because if you are, what hidden risks are compounding in the spaces you aren't even watching? Think about that. Maybe audit your own structures. And I look forward to exploring the fascinating depths of the environmental pillar with you in our next explainer. See you then.